um, interested in continually learning about social emotional learning and trauma-informed care, especially how that pertains to um, our female students, especially those of color.
And
So,
we know it's going to be very difficult to follow Dr. Bettina Love because she's just absolutely amazing. And I love everything that she has to say, but bear with us because we do think that a lot of the information that we have can help us incorporate some very important tools into the work that we do with our girls. So let's take it away, Taylor.
okay. So we just have some shared agreements that we wanted to start with.
So these are basically, we want to make sure that everybody has an opportunity to talk. We do have a presentation PowerPoint. That's what we're comfortable with, but please at any point, if y'all want to talk or raise your hands, we'll be looking to see how we can interact with you all. And hopefully we can go through our PowerPoint a little bit quick so that we can hear from you all. Please just assume everybody is coming at this with an intent to learn and none of malice and with a mentality of public learning, which is not easy to do, but we're hoping to be able to help you all come out and talk to us about what you see as important.
So we just wanted to start by a little bit of background on what I'll be referring to as SEL, which is social emotional learning. Many of you might be familiar. And there's hopefully lots of connections between Dr. Love's session and what we're speaking about today. But it's become a very increasingly hot topic in like the education community and how we use it in our schools and with our youth. And it's been around for quite a while. One of the larger names that you'll hear or organizations that is a leader in SEL research is CASEL, who has been around since 1994 and has come up with definitions and things that we commonly hear, like SELism means basically to help kids comprehend and manage their emotions. And then learn how to feel those emotions fully, and of course, develop empathy for others. And Monica and I were talking, and you know, it's worth noting that while SEL has been around since the 90s, this move towards being culturally sensitive and racially sensitive is like really just coming to a head. And I think even Dr. Love touched on that, like, where is the SEL for our Black and Brown girls? So that's really something that we want to focus on today as well. Because as it's coming from the 90s and as it still exists today, it's sort of like this coming from a predominantly mainstream white perspective. And we need to shift that focus.
And if you don't mind me adding, Taylor, it's nothing new that we have had to adapt our systems, which only considered white and Caucasian students and youth, so that we are actually looking at, you know, where people are coming from, trying to meet them where they are, and understand the bigger context of where they're coming from. So again, Dr. Love talked about like the tests and the standardized tests and putting so much weight on that, but not really looking at the needs of the youth and whether or not their brain is in that state of being able to learn because they have so much other stuff that they're worrying about, let alone now with COVID and all of the stresses that brings with it.
And the reason we're talking about social emotional learning too is that the goal of social emotional learning is to have kids come out of it, you know, learning about positive behaviors, how to manage their behaviors and their emotions in order to make positive decisions, responsible decisions, develop plans to achieve their goals, and also to build positive relationships with others and all across diverse sort of landscapes. So I just wanted to show this, this sort of image here, which is what is referred to as like the Castle Five. So it highlights these five broad overlapping competency areas, which were identified by Castle. And this tool is kind of to show you what we're trying, what the end goal or what some of the goals are that we want our kids to come out of SEL learning with these competencies. And at a larger kind of zoom out lens, it's important to put this tool into context, like Monica was saying, in regards to the impact of COVID, because obviously it set off a global pandemic and caused people of all ages, all types and diversities to experience trauma. And it's important for us as adults to recognize that trauma and also realize that we need to be practicing SEL and working towards these five competencies as well to help our children. So, you know, we want self-awareness, which of course is understanding your own emotions, self-management, again, to manage your emotions and behaviors in different situations, social awareness, so that we can be aware of what other people are going through and also make constructive choices about our own behaviors and social interactions, especially across diverse situations. We want to build out those relationship skills. We want our youths to be, like, starting at a young age, being able to establish and maintain healthy relationships and supportive relationships, and being able to navigate diverse settings and with diverse individuals, and then making responsible decisions. So just, you know, having that aptitude to have constructive choice-making abilities, and again, being able to interact in diverse situations.
And I did want to add, oh, sorry, Taylor.
Yeah.
One of the things that we do, we're trying to do at the museum is listen a lot more so we can learn from each other. And one of the things that in the academic field and things that people are probably tired of hearing me say is, like, the kids are not the problem when it comes to this. It's the adults and it's the systems. We have to know how to manage ourselves and our emotions. There are ways of doing that, and that's the emotional intelligence part, which is basically social emotional learning. That's what SEL is. So we keep policing our kids, especially our Black girls, in so many different ways, but then we can't seem to be able to control our own emotions or to recognize what we're feeling or to be able to empathize with them. So what the cultural perspective of this is like, put yourself in the kids' shoes. Look at the power dynamics that are affecting their relationships, and then look at the generational trauma. We are not in silos. Our families have been affected by trauma consistently and over, depending on, you know, how diverse we are and how much we're able to acculturate if we're talking about Latinx and Hispanic people. So taking all of these self-awareness, self-management, look at yourself first, if you're a teacher or a parent or both, and ask yourself, where do you fall in this? Can you show empathy? Do you have self-awareness? And then if you have that, are you able to manage it? And if the answer is no, then you need to work right along there with the kids.
Yeah, it's definitely easier said than done sometimes.
Mm-hmm.
So also, you know, I've just mentioned Castle really as a framework, but there are dozens of frameworks that are floating around out there, and I just wanted to share this tool from Harvard that is just at your fingertips. Anyone can use this. That has been a great resource for me personally, but also it's just great to compare and contrast the different frameworks that exist. And this does not by any means cover all of them. I think these are probably just a lot of the ones that, you know, are popular, but you can sort of cross-reference all these. If you look at the image, the different domains that are listed above, So for example, if you wanted to focus on identity or identity and emotions, you can click those domains and it's going to like repopulate the different frameworks to show you which frameworks are focusing more on those than other domains. And those domains also will break down further the more you want to break down the information. So it's a really interesting tool for comparing those frameworks, and worth
I
clicking
think,
around on.
sorry, Taylor.
No, you're fine.
And one of the great things, when Taylor brought this up to me, I thought like this is exactly showing why cultural context is so important, because we're talking about values and perspectives. We're talking about socialization, you know, how we bring our identities into different spaces, or if we're allowed to bring our identities into different spaces. Y'all know from, if you're here, then you're interested in this topic. Our girls particularly, and then our Black, African American, and Latinx and other brown kids, we can't bring all of our identities to schools sometimes. We can't, we're not allowed to. You know, we talk about the way we wear our hair, about makeup, about earrings. Even when there are dances, it is policed. What moves are we allowed to do when we're going to the prom or to all of these things? Like, this shows the importance of having these talks and being culturally competent and what that means. You know, I thought it was a tremendous tool to be able to just visualize. This is why it's important. Our kids are not siloed.
So I also wanted to get into sort of a little bit of how is SEL actually approached in schools, and in classrooms. So it's extremely important to students' individual development and their emotional regulation, and, you know, learning skills for collaboration and building skills to have empathy and socialization, like Monica was saying. And so some of these current approaches are okay, I think. Morning check-ins, okay. Integrating SEL into existing curriculum, okay. As well as like group work, it all feels okay, but maybe it'd be greater if we could make it more of a priority in our schools. The group work helps, of course, with like being able to collaborate and sort of kids being able to assign roles to themselves or to others, working together to achieve a common goal. And then there's also a tool through Castle's website about innovative programs that can be implemented. And you can use this tool if you want to research SEL programs that have already been created or designed, or if you're looking to try to design your own, and you can kind of tailor that around what kind of program approach and evaluation outcomes you want to see. And then also take into consideration those student characteristics and school characteristics. So that out of all of these options, some of them seem sort of basic to me, but this innovative program design is something that seems better, but I think that we can even do more than this, because you want kids to have these important soft skills that SEL is building out for our youth. So we wanted to kind of take stock of what you all are thinking for a moment and just share, if you'd like, in the chat what kind of challenges that you experience or you see or you can imagine in implementing SEL in your learning spaces or learning spaces that you're around. Be able to see the chat?
I can see it.
Okay.
While y'all are writing, I can share one of the things that I see is we're trying to incorporate socio-emotional learning. The problem is that though, if we do morning check-ins, are we prepared to hear what the kids are going through? Are we prepared to handle the type of trauma and distress that they face? Anything from being harassed on their way to school to facing the sexism and racism. You know, when the first person you see when you walk in school is a police officer, what messaging are you getting? So like we want to implement socio-emotional learning because we know it's important, but look at the environments in which we're doing it. And are we capable of doing it?
And you all, like, as Monica said, please feel free to like come off mute if you want to share. We would definitely love to hear your input. Oh. Yeah, so I see in the chat that Carrie shared that my school had an SEL curriculum, but gave us 15 minutes to use it in the morning. That overlapped with arrival and breakfast and morning meetings and prepping to transition to reading groups. Wow, that's a lot of overlap. That's not even just a little, like, I mean, just having the kids come in for arrival and also be trying to implement SEL. I'm sure there's little things that you can do, but it doesn't feel like that's actually helping the development of the whole child, which is something else that SEL sort of preaches. Thank you for sharing.
Exactly. Yeah, thank you, Carrie. Again, this is a thing. If we don't make our emotions central to the work that we do, this isn't really going to make a difference. And for the youth who have been shut up and shut out for such a long time, because of our racist and misogynist systems, giving 15 minutes of time to like have SEL is not gonna work. This takes a lot of work. It's one of the things I keep telling our teams. You can't do this work in one day. You can't do it in 15 minutes. It takes time. And Allison mentioned in the chat, not having shared culturally relevant experience with the youth who we're working with. Yes, exactly. As a white woman who grew up in the suburbs, my lived experiences were so different from the youth in urban museum schools. You're right. And that is a struggle. And that's where you start to see, like, are we being performative when we do this work? Are we coming at it from a place of understanding or a place of empathy? My colleagues are probably tired of me saying, you don't understand where people are coming from. You can empathize, but you don't understand because there are different lived experiences. But what Allison said, and thank you for saying that, Allison, so important to being able to reach our youth, being able to say, I have not had those experiences, but I can empathize with how terrible that must have felt.
Yeah. And please feel, I'm going to move forward, but you guys just, if you think of something, just keep adding it to the chat. And we'll monitor that as we move. But some of the challenges that I wanted to highlight are along the same lines as what Dr. Love was stating in her talk earlier, but just this pressure that educators and administrators and districts feel to focus on standards-based testing puts a stop and puts a hold on things like SEL, which might be seen as like extra in a curriculum instead of necessary. And I thought it was really interesting to hear from Dr. Love just about how that testing is tied to corporate America and high stakes and winner takes all. And it definitely feels that way. I never enjoyed standardized testing. I don't know if anyone enjoys it at all, but it feels like a comparison tool and not anything that actually is supposed to be supporting our youth. And yeah, it's just this, it's a similar mainstream white mentality to education, and it's not benefiting our students in meaningful ways. It's just a measurement tool almost. I also think that teachers might not have opportunities, like it was shared in the chat, to focus on SEL as its own content area and without having to implement it into something else that they're already teaching or trying to, welcome students into the classroom. But also here we have to do this, SEL implementation with that. It's just like, it's almost not fair to the teachers and to the students, especially, students that need this. I think a huge problem is not having that school-wide buy-in, and also having a lack of support in funding and in time. So if the schools aren't willing to use their funding for quality SEL curriculum, that's like a loss. And then also if they're not willing to take or allow for that time for the teachers to have quality training on SEL curriculum, because I think that all leads to greater challenges and greater problems. Because if we want to do SEL right and impactfully in schools, we have to focus on our teachers as well, who are going to be the ones administering that knowledge and those things to the kids. It's like we expect our teachers to be experts at math and to be experts at language arts. So why wouldn't we also want that expectation to be the same for social emotional learning?
Exactly.
Yeah.
And I wanted to add to like and I'm going to mention this later on, but I feel like I need to hear is the fact that the reason why this is so important that we get to know our kids on a cultural basis, on an identity basis, is to create trust. And why is that trust important? Well, all of the research that we have, whether it's criminology or sociology, you all pick the academic standard, tell us that if a child has one positive experience with an adult, like that one adult that they can not experience, but that one adult who can be a positive influence on their life, just one, to tell them that they are worth it, that they are cared for, that they are loved, that they are important, that one person can turn the trajectory of a child that is coming from communities that are marginalized by society, that is coming from a trauma, from complex poverty, that is coming from a family environment that may not be functional. Just one person. This is why it's so important, because all of these tools will help us create that trust.
Yeah, and in talking about the challenges, it leads kind of into my next slide. That's coming from Dr. Donna Ford, who has really picked up on some major flaws within the education system and how SEL is used or maybe not used. So Dr. Ford has called attention to the majority of educators, mental health professionals being white, and in their capacity as, basically mental health professionals like school counselors and social workers and psychologists, they're not prepared and armed with the tools that they need to work in culturally relevant ways. So Dr. Ford focuses a lot on, there can't be culture blind approaches to SEL because they're failing our students and they're leading to racial trauma. And even more specifically, the racial trauma that young girls of color are experiencing is like, which Monica will talk about more, but it's a myriad of things just beyond what's happening in school. So school, should be a safe, comfortable place for them to learn and to develop. And if we're not approaching SEL with the acknowledgement and consideration that all of these girls are coming from diverse backgrounds, they're experiencing diverse things, they can't actually become their authentic selves. And that is seems like a crime to me. So it's good that Dr. Ford is pointing these things out so that we can start kind of what Dr. Love was talking about. If maybe we need to be looking at SEL and saying, this isn't working, we need to rebuild. We need to just demolish what's already existing that's not working and rebuild it to actually be culturally sensitive for everyone.
And again, one of the reasons this is so important is because we know that our kids are going through all kinds of adverse childhood experiences. Hopefully you all have heard of ACEs. And you can't take it out of context. every child experiences something. It doesn't mean they're going to be affected the same way. Just like, for example, COVID, and like Dr. Bettina Love said, like, how do we help people interact in a more positive way with our education, with educating our kids in a formal and informal manner, if we're so worried about our basic survival? And we know that in my Latinx communities and Black and African American communities, like, we're worried about the survival. So how do we get past this? And again, like Taylor was saying, this is just as important for the adults as it is for the kids. Like, know where your triggers are. You know, if you experienced adverse childhood experiences, how is that affecting your interactions with the kids who we're supposed to be serving? The chronic stress we're talking about, you know, poverty is a chronic stress. How are we able to talk to our kids about, like, what effect that has? And then layering that with COVID and the extra stresses. Most of our Black and African American communities make up some of the essential workers with little access to some of the most important type of health information, health care. And it's not just about access, it's about feeling empowered enough to get it, right? So that when you experience that trauma, when you experience that serious event, trauma is aggregate. It doesn't go away. So that stress, the ACEs that you have from childhood that most of us, I don't know about you all, but in my family, in my community where I grew up in Costa Rica, like, talking about mental health was not a good thing. It was seen very negatively if you were experiencing mental health issues. We cannot have our children shut up and shut out of being able to talk about their emotions, because that is one way we can get it out of our system. And it matters. It really, really does matter. Oh, go ahead, Taylor. Sorry.
No, you're fine. So with that too, you know, we want to look specifically at how Black and brown girls are viewed and what they're experiencing and how, you know, this all relates to them. So Monica shared this amazing article with me, which is based on Georgetown Law's Center on Poverty and Inequality study on how Black girls are viewed and perceived by adults. And unfortunately, you know, compared to their white peers, Black girls that are as young as 5 are more likely to be perceived as seeming or behaving older than their actual age. They may be perceived as more knowledgeable about adult topics, or more likely to take on adult roles and responsibility. And with that very small, you know, subset being considered, like, Black and brown girls are facing trauma, and among other trauma in school and spaces where I said earlier they should feel comfortable. So it's extremely important that adults who are interacting with these girls are coming into these interactions acknowledging and considering these facts when they're trying to implement SEL tools and programs with those students. And that goes back to Dr. Ford's points that, like, we cannot be culture blind. We have to realize that these children are coming from diverse experiences, and they already experienced trauma as young as 5.
Absolutely. And one of the things that we wanted to let you all know is that this is a physiological thing that we're talking about, the effect of trauma on our kids, and what it looks like. Our brains react differently when we're learning. There is such a thing as a learning brain versus a survival brain. And y'all can see the differences here, you know, when we're talking about the ability to learn. Sometimes learning, especially when you're talking about theory and math and, like, analysis of compositions and all of that kind of thing, if you are not in a state where you can accept ambiguity, where you can accept that you're going to make mistakes and that's okay. And when you believe that you're going to be able to learn. If you're not in that brain and you're just trying to survive and get through the day because you have all kinds of stuff happening in your life, we are not going to be able to reach these kids. Like our body, there's a fantastic book called, I believe it's called, and don't ask me for the author because I'm terrible with names. I believe it's called The Body Keeps Score. And it talks about how we internalize all of this, which again is why SEL is so important, as long as we know how to do it in a responsible manner. Our brains aggregate all that trauma. We start being afraid of making mistakes. We start reacting in ways that may not be good in particular situations. So, for example, something that somebody who's a learning brain may see as a small thing to overcome, somebody else may see it as an attack on their person. They may see it as something that they are just too angry and too triggered to get past. It takes a while to recover from some of these things. If we are not willing to meet our kids where they are, especially when we start to take into consideration, Taylor, you can go to the next slide, please. You start to take into consideration the multiple levels of trauma that our kids undergo. We're not going to be able to reach them, and the longer they stay in this state, the harder it is to get them out. This is a model, and I use this a lot. It's a sociological model that starts to show us the types of stresses, anything from experiencing on our bodies and our minds, emotional abuse, even just witnessing it, physical abuse, sexual abuse, and then seeing it in our close relationships. I'm going to say this again because I think it's important. The problem is not our kids. The problem is us and our inability to talk about some of these things and to talk about taboo subjects. And then the outside systems like the biased hiring, the systemic racism, the generational trauma. And Taylor and I have been having awesome conversations about all of this. I was telling her about one of my girlfriends. I was checking in on her to see how she was doing. She lives in New York. She's a Black American woman. She identifies herself as such. And she told me that because she believed in getting, with the whole get a vaccine and COVID, that she drove up to a more affluent white Caucasian neighborhood in order to get the vaccine there, because she thought that if she got it in her own neighborhood, which is more culturally diverse, more Black and brown people live there, that she was not secure in the knowledge that they would not be testing something out in the poorer, less affluent communities where she was. So she spent her own resources to drive up to a primarily Caucasian community because she knew that nobody would be doing tests on them up there. But she did not trust that the same thing would be in her neighborhood. That's generational trauma. That right there is generational trauma. And our girls are experiencing that over and over again because people objectify, adultify, criminalize, oppress, police them on their bodies. I once had a conversation with I was doing a focus group with educators, and we brought up, like, what do you do when you see a girl being harassed? That somebody's harassing her. And the educator's response was, I mean, if I stop one, 5 others are still going to happen. So why stop that one? I mean, I can't do anything about the rest. I'm like, look, you need to retire if that's the way you're looking at things. Like, and I felt bad afterwards, but not really, when I told this person, like, no, you need to leave the space If you don't think that helping that one girl is worth it because it's going to be happening 5 other times, I mean, that's not okay. So we've got to look at ourselves like this trauma is on us as well. And the intersectionality of it. What about Black girls with disabilities, with neurodiversity, coming from under-resourced communities, from some of the schools that Dr. Love was talking about, where like if we could just inject funds into these communities, so much could be done. And all of those intersectionalities can lead to a conglomeration of trauma that does not go away and our bodies pay for it. You know, like we talk about COVID and all of these things affecting our girls. It's worse for our populations who have already experienced that generational trauma. We've got to be able to talk about it.
Yeah, and just looking at your last slide too, Monica, just with the comparison of the learning brain and the survival brain. I mean, I think everyone at this point on this call has probably experienced, you know, the trauma that comes with these just in the past year. And so just like, I was trying to think about, was I in survival brain at all? And like, when did that start? And when did I come out of it in terms of in COVID? And I don't even have the added layers of trauma that, you know, like girls younger than me have. So yeah, that's just another point as to like how we need to come into things with that cultural and racial sensitivity. Yeah. So with that, another poll that we wanted to hear your feedback on, again, please add to the chat, please speak out, but just like how can teachers or just adults in general, how can we be better supporting our Black and brown female students?
While people put in their information, I'll share mine. One of the ways that I listen or I help kids or have in the past in work is to recognize my lack of knowledge in certain spaces. I am and I say this with pain because people think it's a negative thing, and I have internalized it, a white passing Hispanic Latina. And so my experiences are not the same as my Black and brown colleagues. And so my whole thing is I'm supporting people by listening and learning and having cultural humility. And I feel like if we could share that and be humble and be like, tell our kids. I tell my son all the time, he gets tired of me. He is so tired of me. I'm like, look, dude, I'm learning from you. Okay, you're teaching me stuff too. And I want them to have that empowerment because it is a power dynamic. We want to break it down.
I think about Dr. Love was talking about with the trauma that these girls are experiencing, just also like allowing kids and adults to feel like rage and also joy. Like that's a whole part of dealing with your trauma, and like also like learning through SEL is like feeling those emotions and managing them. Sometimes I don't like the word managing emotions, but we have to just like let these kids acknowledge that you can feel so many different things and it's okay to feel those things. I'm trying to teach my son, like, it's okay to be mad. You're allowed to be mad. You're allowed to cry. Things that are sometimes hard to like work through. I'm as an adult also trying to like work through that with him so that I'm like, no crying. We can't be crying. You just have to, like you said, Monica, you have to like give the space for people to experience these things.
Absolutely. And Ashley in the chat said that the mentoring partnership of Southwest PA Something that we advocate for is having a mentor-like approach with all young people to be intentional and thoughtful in each interaction. I think this is especially true, and we need particular awareness when supporting Black and Brown students. Absolutely, absolutely. And the mentor idea is fantastic. And then Kay mentioned, by not bringing the cultural expectations of past generations affect how I respond. Yes, thank you for saying that to both of y'all. That aspect of projecting our own generational traumas onto our kids, we've got to be very careful about that. We've got to be very careful about that.
It's really hard.
Yes, it is.
It's so hard. Monica and I have conversations about this all the time. Because I mean,
it is.
Being if anyone has kids, or obviously we all have some affiliation with kids, but you know, as a parent, you're kind of like your kid's first teacher, and so also trying to travel that journey and not bring in your own, like Kay is saying, like your own understandings and things and your past into the present with how you're working with kids. That's like,
oh, absolutely, absolutely. And then Stephanie said, I love the point that teachers' own social and emotional journey is key. We can't teach what we don't know for ourselves. Yes, and it's also important that educators work with their own secondary trauma and compassion fatigue. Oh my gosh, yes. Finally, when I went through teacher training, I was never taught that misbehavior or disruption are actually showing us that kids need skills or space to work with their emotions. That understanding brings about culture shift in schools. Yes, thank you, Stephanie. Absolutely. One of the first things I would love teachers to be able to say to their kids is, there are no negative emotions. No negative emotions. It's what we do with them that can become negative. And that is a choice and a determination that they can make. So having those spaces to teach that kind of information is vitally important. High expectations is scaffold learning so that they can reach the bar. Too often we sympathize on lower expectations versus empathizing and empowering them with core skills. Yes.
Love that.
I love that. And I think that was you, Meredith, as a host on this. Thank you. That is absolutely true. And again, so it's a discussion for adults too, right? Like we are like, oh, well, we need to hire more diversity. And then some people are like, oh, does that mean we have to hire with the lower expectations? It's like, what in the world makes you think that that's a necessity? Like, no.
I would just like to add to that, as because I work in different spaces, and with ASI tutoring, we have a lot of people in the space that are not professional educators or not pursuing educational degrees. Good teaching is good, effective teaching. Children know when you care. Children learn really quickly who's invested, who is not in them. And even if you don't share their background and their culture, you can see the difference between an instructor that the kids clamor to, and they'll say, hey, come on, Miss Mendez, let's teach you. I want to teach you this or that, because they know you care. They know you're vested in them, versus a teacher who doesn't share their cultural background, doesn't have a welcoming space for them, that they shun. They avoid that class, they cut class, they're disrespectful, they don't share anything, they put their heads down. Even if you're a kid who struggles, how you show up in one instructor's class versus how you show up in another instructor's class can be polar opposites, because I know you care, or you're invested, or you're trying, or you're pushing me out and shunning. I also want to speak to just the behavior. When I first started teaching, and I'm not in a classroom anymore, it's so long, I'm so old, but when I first started teaching, I was taught as a first year teacher, like similarly to the individual that put in the chat about misbehavior, that it was something they were doing. It was what they were doing. It was the parent, because, you know, of course, parents only send their worst behaved children to school. They keep the good ones at home in the closet, right? But it's you're in as a new teacher, and you're like, oh, it's just a kid, it's the home life. It's so, and all of that college preparation, which is a total another seminar, doesn't make you look inward.
Yes.
They don't make the connection for you. Like, it didn't
Mhm.
occur to me that the reason why my kids always shouted out is because I called on them when they shouted out. I gave them the attention. I reinforced it. That I didn't have a procedure for getting paper and a pencil. That the ultimate power in the room was me. And I was governing my class through fear. I was governing it through fear of consequence. You're going to miss recess. You're going to get lunch detention.
Mhm.
I'm going to call your mother. Versus creating a cultural and nurturing environment. We're asking questions and growth mindset and how we learn and how we build up each other and how we support and struggling with something, celebrating as a class when you reach those milestones and having honest conversations. Hey guys, we really got to get this. This is how we're scoring. Let Miss Meredith take a look at how she's teaching this, because this isn't coming up right. Really looking at the test score and saying, if I'm the only fifth grade teacher teaching fractions in this building for 5 years, and none of the kids coming out of fifth grade can know how to do fractions, it's not the kid, it's me. It's me. Failing students is a failing teacher. That's a reflection on me. It's not the house. It's not the parent. It's not the principal who never comes in my classroom. It is me. It's me, because all kids can learn. All kids can learn. Doesn't matter what color they are. Everybody has the capacity to learn and grow. But as an educator, as a teacher, you have to be courageous enough to say, I know that all kids can learn. I know there's something that I'm not doing. There's a growth trajectory for me as a professional to be able to foster this and access content,
Mhm.
have kids be able to access content in my class. And as a young teacher, you're not taught that. You're really taught to don't let them see you sweat, don't smile for the first 30 days. You're sitting there trying to learn Spanish and putting up all, representation across the walls and bulletin boards. But that doesn't have, those are the little things, what I call the fluff and the puff. That's really not getting down to how you establish rapport with kids. We got teachers rapping, we got them waiting at the doors, and we got them waiting at the bus stop. That's not enough. That's not enough. If you put a college pennant outside of a room, or you tell kids, hey, we're all going to college, that's not enough to get them there. You got to keep moving. If I don't learn anything in this classroom that helps me get to the next grade, I'm not going to make it to college, no matter how many figures or representatives I see around this room. I got to have the knowledge. I got to have the coping skills. There has to be a sounding board for my emotions. I have to learn how to interact with people. I have to learn how to code switch. And all children have to learn how to do that, regardless of their backgrounds and race. I have to learn professional versus informal. I have to learn that there's gatekeeping, and how do I get through the gate? When opportunity knocks, I got to be ready to walk through it. And as teachers and parents and community leaders, we got to give kids that. We got to give them what they need. I'm sorry, I'm done.
That was all so great. That was amazing.
Thank you.
Yeah, I'm thinking just Meredith, I wrote down, I love that you're talking about the teacher as the ultimate power. I experienced that in school. I went to a Catholic school for 12 years. So I feel like a police does a girl as well. But how you're talking about, you realize that you have to have procedures, and you set up those procedures so that kids can have agency and sort of solve the problems on their own. That is that's brilliant. It's something that feels like it should be common sense, but it's not, because you said, you were trained to just be don't let them sweat,
Right.
don't smile.
I'm the power in the room. Everything in this room belongs to me. You don't touch it. You don't move unless I say so. That's the pipeline, right?
Why do we
That's
do
the
that?
pipeline. You can't
Yeah.
touch anything here. Everything you do is controlled by me. And then you wonder why kids shut down, because this isn't their space. It's not about them. It's about me. And it has to be about them. But
Yeah.
you're taught as a new teacher indirectly that it very much becomes about you, because you're in a vulnerable space. You're new, you're nervous, you're scared, you're still learning content as a young novice teacher.
Yeah.
You don't have the mentor support to come in and help you recognize that. And when I first started teaching, I didn't have children. that's a whole nother ball of wax, because you don't even understand if you view when, and we often say, you know, is this good enough for your child? But when I was 20 in my teaching career, I didn't have any children. So I didn't even have context to make the relation to that. I didn't, you know, I didn't know. And we don't really take a good look at teacher preparation programs. You know, in the SEL learning, that socio-emotional learning that has to happen, that should be an integral part. But if I, as the new teacher, the principal is saying, control the kids, you know, the seasoned teacher on the team is saying, control these kids, get them ready for the test. If they misbehave, kick them out. You know, that whole, the school-wide culture, the district culture, they're bigger issues. I can't wait for you ladies to solve them. I can't wait. I don't.
So like you have also touched on the other question of like, how do we support the teachers? It sounds like, you know, teachers need more, first of all, more training that's like appropriate, like you said, when you're coming into the classroom, not to be instilling fear and power, but also like having that support of their teacher community, their educator community as well. Like, I mean, there's people that have been like, you know, they know the ropes because they've been teaching for however long. Why are they not also sharing that information in effective ways with their colleagues? Or can that be something that's put into place so that teachers can support one another? There's probably not enough space for that either. I mean, I just think about teachers being like strapped for time constantly. And there's like no time to actually have that professional development. Go ahead, Monica. I know
And
we're
speaking of time, we have like 3 minutes left.
okay, I'm gonna...
yeah, no, one of the things I do want to say to Meredith, thank you. Absolutely. If we can tell our teachers that the top 10 skills that companies are looking at in order to hire people have to do with emotional intelligence, have to do with social emotional learning, maybe we can get administrators to allow this, like, for time, because that's what matters. It's not a soft skill, it's a strategic skill. People management is strategic. Okay, I'm gonna shut up. Go ahead, Taylor.
No, I'm thinking with you too. Like, I'm with you. I mean, I feel like we kind of touched on this information as well. Just like some avenues for supporting our teachers and adults is you know, having SEL informed by trauma informed care. Coming into it knowing that kids have all different experiences, especially the kids who come from diverse backgrounds, and that your experience as a teacher is more than likely going to be different than what your students have been through. Again, acknowledging and recognizing to not be culture blind and to be sensitive about what people are experiencing. And then also referring to SEL frameworks that are actually designed for youth of color. Like, we don't all have to follow CASEL. There's a bunch of other frameworks that have been found to be successful and better for youth of color. And this is just a list of a few of what those some of those frameworks are that have been found to provide kids with skills that they need, and they're managing their emotions, their behavior improves. But the ones that I think are maybe the most important to just note for a minute are the Too Good for Violence, because that has a multicultural team behind the development of the framework, which I think is relevant. And that also covers like a K through 12 scale. Some of the programs are just designed for K through 4. The 4 R's, which is reading, writing, respect, and resolution, is a pre-K through 8 framework. That one also has a multicultural team that developed it. So they're coming from that culturally competent background. And then student success skills, which is SSS, is another K through 12 framework that features a mindfulness strategy, which I think is also really interesting. So they're giving kids tools and strategies for how to build like tools to be calm and to calm themselves.
Yeah, and we're out of time. But we can definitely get the rest of this to you all. Because Taylor, would you mind going to the next slide? Yeah, like no, not the elephants, the other one. Yeah. You know, we can send you this as a resource for you all to have, just so that you all can start thinking about, like, how do I validate feelings? What does the environment look like for somebody who has experienced trauma? Like, setting up your environment so that it is not trauma inducing or triggering is an important part of this. You know, and knowing and having like an idea of what danger zones, what can trigger our kids, and then what can trigger us, because fatigue is real. And with COVID, it's even worse. And I'm not talking about the symptoms. I'm talking about all of the other things that we're going through. It's important. But Taylor, can you go to the next one? And then I promise I'll end. Elephants. I love elephants. One of the most amazing thing about elephants is that they play. And when you see the little baby elephants playing, like, one of the only reasons they're able to do that in an outside environment is that their moms and the matriarchs of their herds are watching over them and making sure that nothing bad happens to them. Like, and it's usually the females. Yeah, I'm not gonna make any more comments about that, but they're able to be kid elephants because they have us to protect them. We want you, like, take away, we want you to be that elephant. See, I knew Taylor was going to come out bad. It sounds terrible, but be that elephant in the child's life. Be the person that they know has their back, that can back them up emotionally, that is there to listen and learn with them, so that they can then grow up to have, like, a positive, safe, and healthy life. So thank you all for coming, Taylor. Awesome. This is us. If you all want to contact us, Taylor and I love talking about this stuff. You should hear our conversations. It's so important, and we welcome any feedback and any discussions that you all want to have. But thank you so much. Y'all have a wonderful day.